Um, I had the most interesting experience this week of watching a 2 hour interview that a friend of mine did with a person who was diagnosed as a sociopath and who is no longer particularly acting that way. He had quite the epiphany. It was a roadside Jesus-oriented epiphany, by the way, and it changed his life. Now, it didn't change his life overnight. It didn't change his behavior overnight. Often it does not. Like waking up from a cult, like waking up from a long sleep or slumber, there are adjustment periods, and sometimes as one adjusts to a new way of looking at the world or a new way of thinking about things, it takes some time to orient. I have referred to this process coming out of a cult as recovery. It's been a years-long process. Why would it be any different for anybody experiencing, drastic sudden change? It's something you have to get used to. Our brain is not a binary turn the switch on, turn the switch off mechanism. There are millions, billions of connections up here between neurons and between all the what's called glia, the glue that holds it all together, which is actually more than that, they are finding. Everything up here has got something going on connected with either predicting behavior, calculating consequences, calculating cause effect, right? That's the consequence part, or memory and recalling past events so as to predict again for the future. These are primary functions of the gray matter up here. And
they're both good and bad.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the thing is the brain is not built around absolute values. It's not built around concepts of this is always good and this is always bad. Everything is relative. A brain is a black box mechanism. It sits in your head. It doesn't see things. It receives input that is neural. And so change coming to a brain, and if we're going to talk about how things change and where I'm going with all of this, then we have to kind of understand a couple little things. I'm not even going to throw big words at you. There's only one word I want to throw at you today, and that is plasticity. The brain has what's called neuroplasticity, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because it has everything to do with what I'm going to talk about with good and evil, bad and saintly behavior. And quite simply, this is I'm reading from a blog article from Very Well Mind, and this looked like a good condensation written by Kendra Cherry, MSED, and medically reviewed by Shaheen Lakim or Lakan, MD. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change and adapt due to experience. That's it. That's it. The brain changes. It rewrites itself. This is a self-correcting mechanism. It is capable of learning, and that's rewriting neural pathways, and it's capable of changing those pathways and adopting new pathways and new ways to think about things. We do this all the time. It is an umbrella term. Neuroplasticity is an umbrella term referring to the brain's ability to change, reorganize, or grow neural networks. And if you imagine that there's more going on up here than in all the stars in the sky you will see through any telescope you look through, you will be 100% right. It's that complicated. There's that much volume going on up here. This can involve functional changes due to brain damage or structural changes due to learning. Plasticity refers to the brain's malleability or ability to change. It does not imply that the brain is plastic. Neuro refers to neurons, the nerve cells that are the building blocks of the brain and the nervous system. Thus, neuroplasticity allows nerve cells to change or adjust. Because what I'm talking about today is not about spiritual change or moral change. I'm talking about actual neural change. What struck me, one of the things that struck me is so interesting about listening to this sociopath talk about himself and his past and growing up. Well, let me ask you this. How many of you all think that sociopaths and psychopaths and all these evil, bad, horrible people are just born that way, and they were always going to be evil, and there was nothing ever that was ever going to be done in order to change that. Do any of you think that's actually the case, that people are just born this way and there's nothing that can ever be done about it? My think on that,
I think it kind of maybe depends on the person.
Well, it does. I'm not going to say nobody's born genetically screwed up, but that's actually the key word right there, is predisposed. Mm-hmm. People can be predisposed to be going in certain directions, such as paths of narcissism, paths of ego, paths of all about me and not about anybody else. That's possible. But what turns it on and activates that kind of thing tends to be broken attachments, disorganized attachments, physical abuse that locks in stress chemicals. You create stressful environments for children, little children I'm talking about. I'm talking about 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, way before they're thinking in terms of narcissism and ego. Right? You have families where these children will be beaten into their sociopathy. The potential was there, but it doesn't necessarily activate with everybody. And this is not, I'm not pretending to explain all of this, but what I'm talking about right now is scientific research. And this is stuff you can look up. And it's fascinating because it gives us insight into, one, preventive measures to not create more sociopaths or psychopaths, and two, if you can turn it on, maybe there are ways of turning it off. Or conversely, on the note of today's show, perhaps there are ways of reinforcing it too throughout a person's life. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, is how cults. Well, let me back up a little bit more, give a little bit more foundation here. The story of how people change from bad to good, we find, this is a subject I'm going to be doing a podcast on in the future, about how religion, this is one of the things that religion brings people, these moments, these what I will call epiphanies, these euphoric moments where Jesus came into me, or I was taken by the Spirit, or something like that, is how they interpret the event. And that's fine. I'm not, I don't know that Jesus didn't do that. I can't say that. But what I can say is neurologically, changes happen. And those changes are what are reflected in the behavioral changes. You don't make changes in your daily habits and routines and world outlook or moral foundations without rewriting your neural pathways. One follows the other. So it got me thinking that these moments, these epiphany moments where people go from bad to good, could also happen the other way.
Oh, sure.
And you could create or reinforce a bad personality trait, or a negative, what we might all think of as a negative personality trait. The brain doesn't care.
Well, it's almost like the epiphany could also be like the other term for going from good to bad. Epiphany is snapped. So maybe that's not the right word anymore. They didn't snap. They just went from positive to negative.
Well, see, that's kind of what I'm looking at, right? And here's what I was thinking, and this is all just me thinking, okay? This part here is my conjecture now, and something I'm like kind of really wondering about, and I wanted to throw it out there and see what y'all thought about this. In a cult situation, you are changed. Your moral foundations change. And what I mean by that is your concepts of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad change. Mm-hmm. When I was a Scientologist, it was perfectly okay to talk down to people, to think about people as less than me, and to even devalue certain human lives because they just don't matter, or they're just evil, or they're just bad, or whatever, and all of that crap. In a cult, all of that is heightened. All of that is dialed up. As I say all the time, it goes up to 11. What causes that? The same kind of events that cause a person to go from bad to good. These epiphany moments. And the way I started thinking about it, and the way I was talking about it with my friend who did the interview on the Sociopath, we had a long talk about this. And I said, it's like there are positive epiphanies, and could there also be negative epiphanies? Now, this is us judging them based on culture and our ethics and our idea of good and bad and right and wrong, right? And most of us agree killing people's not so great, especially if for no justification whatsoever or rationalization at all. But where does, let me think about this for a second, because
how do people figure out how to justify it even though somebody else wouldn't use that same rationale?
Well, when you're in a group situation, where I was thinking is, when I was a Scientologist, right, I was raised with the same values everybody else is, right? Don't steal, don't this, don't that, don't the other thing. So how do I go into a group and adopt these new values and these new ideas and think this is the way to be, devalue human life, be narcissistic? And I was incredibly narcissistic as a Scientologist. And it developed more and more and more over the years. Why does that happen? Because of all the positive reinforcement that you get from the group pushing you to be that way. These are social pressures, but I think there's an additional factor. We can talk about peer pressure and social pressures and cultural influence on a person, and these are very, very real things. If you walk into a group of people, right, we know from the Ash conformity experiments that 75% of people who find themselves in a group of people who are saying clearly crazy things will contribute to the crazy things or the false things rather than try to correct everybody, because there's, it's all of them against me. So we know that's a factor, but I think there's more, right? Because you walk out of that group and you kind of think about it for a second, and you go, that didn't make any goddamn sense, right? So it needs to be continually reinforced in order to create a permanent change. But what if these epiphany moments, these moments of, oh my God, right? L. Ron Hubbard was right. Homeless people should be put on a barge and blown up. Because that's what he said in Science of Survival.
Wow.
Right? He talked about down in Venezuela, a solution many years ago with what's the disease? Leprosy. That they put a bunch of lepers on a barge and they just sent it out in the middle of a river and they just blew it up, and that solved their leprosy problem. And Hubbard said that would be a great idea for certain other individuals, like everybody who's in the 1-1 band, which includes the entire LGBT spectrum.
Wow.
Everybody who's in there, right? That's all 1-1.
Yeah.
Whole sexual perverts, anybody Hubbard didn't agree with, he called them 1-1. And if you're 1-1, out on the barge you go. And when you start thinking as a Scientologist that this is logical thinking and that this makes sense, right? Your moral foundations are changing. Your ideas of good and bad, right and wrong are radically changing. What causes that? Well, how about an auditing session? How about a moment of, oh my God, right? This is true. This is right. These things L. Ron Hubbard is talking about are so true. I must embrace all of it and make it, I must be like Ron. What would Ron do in this situation? All this sort of follow the leader mentality that goes on in cults becomes your own rewriting of your personality. This is, Hassan's talked about this for years. What's that now? I'm being narc, but he looks... I don't understand.
He likes S-chats, super chats.
Oh, I do like super chats. Yes, thank you both. Sorry, I have a hard time understanding that. Yes, so Well, see, that's the thing, X-Science. Sometimes he asks a question, can our prison system rehabilitate a person from doing evil into being good? It happens.
I would say we probably need to work to do the rehabilitation part better. I think we're very focused on punishment.
Very much so. And I could go on for hours about that. The reason I say sometimes is it's an accident. And religious epiphanies in prison, it's a rock bottom epiphany. Those are the most powerful as far as I can tell. Opinion, okay? But they are the big ones. When you hit rock bottom and you have that moment, right? If I got to change my life, I got to get off the drugs, I got to quit the alcohol, I got to quit screwing around with my wife, I got to whatever, I got to stop kicking the dog. Whatever that bottom wrong moment is for a person, when they hit that ruin point is what they call it in Scientology. And they're trying to get you there on day one. A really interesting point, right? Is you're trying to get ruined on day one. That's your entrance point onto the bridge to total freedom in Scientology is ruin. I can show it to you on a grade chart sometime. It's right in the middle column. It's called the awareness characteristics, and ruin is the first place you're supposed to start. The recognition that you are fucked beyond belief. And then comes this concept of need of change Hubbard talked about. That need of change that he observed and talked about is this epiphanal moment, this moment of, I've got to change. Now, right there is when the cults get you. Those are the most powerful moments when they get you. Because you're in a moment where I believe this state of mind, this rock bottom, desperate to change, must make a change kind of moments in our lives are moments of what I will call, this is not a technical thing. I don't have any studies for this, okay? But I'm just saying, I call that a moment of hyperplasticity, a moment when you can rewrite so much, so fast, and change your entire outlook. That happened to me when I went down the internet rabbit hole. It happened to a lot of us. We have those moments that, oh my God, and everything turns on a dime. Well, if it can turn positive, it can just as easily turn negative for people in the right context. And the example that I'm going to offer here actually comes out of entertainment, but it's a useful analogy to make because I think most of you will be able to relate to this or have seen this, and that is Breaking Bad. Walter White starts out as this egotistical, but it's very buried.
Yeah, kind of average guy.
Yeah, well, kind of. Yeah. Pretty smart. Teaching, chemistry at a high school because he kind of blew his opportunities and got, all the stuff we find out about through the show. Mm-hmm. But look at the path he went down. Now, there's no moments of like, but there's a moment right at the beginning of the show, right from the get-go. He gets this terminal cancer diagnosis. If that's not rock bottom, I don't know what is, right? Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And what does he decide to do? He decides to break bad, not break good. He's got all the potential in him to do the good stuff, but he goes in this direction. It's a decision that he makes.
Well, and I would say probably one of the moments that sticks out to me for when he kind of really becomes not just this guy doing stuff to help his family, not just doing stuff to pay the bills, but really steps over the line into evil is when he lets Jesse's girlfriend die when he could have saved her.
Yes. My point is there are steps along the way. Mm-hmm. It's not just once. And in a cult, it's not just once. You have to get re-upped. But these moments, these powerful moments, why do you think cult leaders insist on these techniques, these weird mind-altering techniques that we would talk about with the chanting and the mantras and the meditation, or in TM, in transcendental meditation? They're levitating, they're hopping around, right? And their meditation, trying to save the world. They literally think they're saving the world. The Scientologists with the auditing, You can go in and have a cognition, you can have a wah, and you can reinforce the bad. I was right for blowing up all those degraded beings. I was right for ruining that suppressive person, that evil bastard. I was right for stalking and harassing that guy. Yeah, and here's this epiphanal moment where they're reinforcing the evil. And that's how cults create evil, is they put a different value set there for you to take on. They insist on it. And you slowly or quickly take it on as your own, and you rewrite your own, literally are rewriting your own moral foundations, right? Your own concepts of good and bad and right and wrong. It's that simple. And it's that powerful, because when you're doing it, and this is the key, this is super key. It's not someone standing over you telling you. That happened already. Somebody standing over you telling you, or you read the books, or you saw the scripture, or you did whatever. It's that moment when you make the change and it feels awesome. And you're that much further along into a different moral set where right is wrong and good is bad and black is white and up is down. And that's what cults do to you. And they do it on purpose. It's a campaigned effort. It's a dedicated program of change to turn you into something else than you already are. You're not good enough, strong enough, best enough when you get in there. That's the whole point. And you're coming in there demanding change, needing a difference in your life because you have no idea what's wrong, but something's wrong. And here's the solution for you. Oh, this is the solution? Okay, I guess I'll follow it. And here comes the chanting, here come the rituals, here comes the auditing, here comes the praying for hours on end, here comes the whipping and the beatings, here comes all of it to make you convinced that you need to change in this direction. And then comes those powerful moments where you decide to do so. And when they're particularly powerful, right, we remember them. We remember them forever. And they change us not in a permanent way. That's the whole point. All of this can be changed back. I mean, you guys see me now and you say, wow, he's kind of a nice guy and he does good things and I like his shows and he seems like a moral person that I can get along with and agree with. You wouldn't have said that about me 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You would have thought I was out of my fucking mind. Some of the stuff that I used to say. I was going through some pictures today. I was finding some photos for somebody of my time in Scientology. And I was finding letters my mom had sent me that I had sent to my grandma and to her when I was in Scientology. And even one I sent to her when I was on the RPF. It was this handwritten letter. And I just couldn't believe I was just reading this stuff going, wow, who is this person? I mean, I read.
Yeah, you read the letter to the editor that he wrote to me.
When I was back in the early 90s in Santa Barbara, I wrote a letter about the homeless and how the homeless just need to get off their asses and get into production. And why is it up to me to have to donate anything or contribute anything to a bunch of people who don't contribute anything to society? Right? That was my attitude back then. I felt so strongly about it. I wrote it to the newspaper, right? And obviously I don't feel that way now. My whole outlook is completely different from that. And it's not just age or maturity. I was an adult when I wrote that. It was that I had a completely different moral foundation, right? And that's what can change. That's the kind of change I'm talking about. Really basic, fundamental personality changes. Powerful stuff. And it takes powerful experiences to cause this kind of, again, I'm making up terms here, but this hyperplasticity, these moments of like massive change in a very short period of time. These are pivotal moments in our lives. And when cults are doing this to you, they are pushing you down a path of evil. I don't know what other word to use. I was not a good person as a Scientologist. I thought I was. I was absolutely convinced I was. There are all kinds of people and all kinds of groups who are absolutely positive they are the most good people. I mean, fuck, in Scientology, we literally called ourselves the most ethical people on the planet. You know, Buddha, the Pope, Dalai Lama, Mr. Rogers, amateurs, bunch of jokers, right? Compared to us Scientologists. I mean, that's how we thought. So, so that's, you know, well, exactly. And that's exactly the point, X-Scion, is, you know, I offer myself as an example, but, you know, this Shawn McCraney guy who my friend Matt interviewed, another example of this, right? Here was a man who grew up. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about this story just to kind of cap this thing, and then we can see about picking up this. I think Henny's on the phone. We can look at even a person who is a diagnosed sociopath, right? A man who will tell you in detail how he grew up and his description of himself and how he considered and thought about other people is he had no conscience and no empathy. He literally didn't give a crap about anyone but himself. And he got into all kinds of trouble because he thought it was fun to hurt other people, to hurt their things, to lure as a 4 or 5 year old. He was luring all the neighborhood kids one by one into this river area where he would ruin their nice new clothes. He would purposefully take them and trick them into falling into the river, stepping into this muddy river and ruining their clothes. And he thought it was hilarious. He thought it was absolutely the funniest thing ever. And he couldn't understand why nobody else did too. And it took him a few years to figure out how to navigate group situations and turn on what he called learn how to turn on the charm, because his real self was completely and wholly unacceptable to everyone around him. And he figured that out early and realized he needed to fit into this society. And and here's the thing that's really interesting when you really get into the details of listening to people like this and when they're really willing to talk. And this man has changed dramatically since then. But he talked, you know, you realize they're human too. They have emotional needs. They have desires. They want to not get along with other people, but they do need to navigate life. But it's interesting because I wrote this quote down from what he said. If you can live without empathy, you can do anything. The world is your oyster. It's almost a kind of superpower to be that way. I mean, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, if you think about it from why would evolution or why would nature produce this phenomenon? Because it's common enough that it's not just some genetic deformation.
Right. I mean, a lot of people suspect that a lot of these people that are running companies have sociopathic tendencies. They may not be full-blown sociopaths, but to be able to do things like lay off 100,000 people in one day, I mean, you have to be able to separate yourself from the empathy somehow.
That's exactly right. And that's why our current societal structure, this is just an objective statement. There's no value judgment on my part. I think it's crystal clear to anybody who looks that our entire sort of capitalistic social structure is built to promote sociopathy. I just happen to think that's true, right? Because of exactly what she just said.
Yeah.
The people who are willing to make those kind of decisions and actually crave making those kinds of decisions, want positions of power to lord it over other people, are people who will climb that ladder way faster than empathetic people. And our society rewards that right now. And there's a little bit of a problem with that. In fact, I think there's a much more than a little. But we kind of have to come to a recognition that that's actually the truth. And then we all kind of have to come to a recognition that maybe that's not the best system we could all have, right? And I'm not suggesting we all go communist. I'm just saying that when you put a system in place that rewards sociopathy, then don't be surprised when sociopaths are running the show. And then don't be surprised when they have absolutely no care for all of the people below them at all. And they don't care about how much you get paid. They don't care about your benefits. They don't care about how much you have to pay for stuff. They don't care about your problems. They literally don't care. There's no caring within them. That's what it means to be that way. So these are the people who tend to be very successful in our society if they also have the intelligence to navigate and the charm to navigate and move on up and produce what needs to be produced to put them in the positions of power that they crave. But not everybody gets to that position, and this man who was interviewed is certainly one of them. He was not any big wig or anything like that, but he talked about, very frankly, his time growing up and his time as a sort of, I'll say, practicing sociopath, constantly cheating on his wife, constantly hurting other people. This was a man who engaged in what he said were dozens of incidents of road rage. This is the guy who would force you to the side of the road and start banging on your car and force you out of the car and then beat you up. That's this guy. That's who this guy was. And there were a number, like with me getting out of Scientology, it can take some time. There's some sort of ground that needs to be fertilized a little bit up here to prep for these epiphanal moments. I don't think they just come out of the nowhere. For me, it was a 10-year process leaving Scientology, and that means a 10-year process losing some of that sort of installed narcissism and sociopathy that Scientology was putting there inside of me. I'll go there. I'll say sociopathy because I'll tell you straight up that I'm not going to say I was a diagnosed sociopath, but I'm saying that behavior is encouraged because in Scientology, you can't have empathy for whole classes of people. We pretended we cared about everybody, but we really didn't. And if you hear Scientologists talk behind closed doors, you'd be shocked at some of the stuff they say. So, yeah, Anthony, yeah, I do happen to think that a lot of presidents are this way. Not all of them, but I think some of them are, yeah. Absolutely.
I'm not sure Jimmy Carter's a psychopath.
No, Jimmy Carter is absolutely the exception to the rule, in fact. But a Richard Nixon.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Absolutely. A Trump, of course.
Even Bill Clinton.
Right? Yeah, actually. Now that we know some of the dirt. Yeah, absolutely. Right? It's not a left-right thing.
Nope.
You know, it's not, it has nothing to do with that. That's why I'm kind of like, politics is just kind of like, ugh, to me now. It's like, okay. Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Absolutely. It's an instilled thing. And if we can become narcissists in Scientology, there isn't any reason we couldn't become sociopaths either. And it's a very selfish place to be. It is the most selfish place to be. Okay, so like I said, this is something that you can be pushed into, and it's something you can get out of. And that is such good news. At the end of the day, this is all actually really good news because it's not good news that cults do this to people. The good news is that you can change, you can revert, you can turn it back, or you can grow out of this. John Atack and I, in some of our conversations, John's alluded to the fact that in older ages, the sociopathy or the psychopathy tends to die off a little bit, to chill out. As a person gets older, that's again neuroplasticity and change and experience. And I'll tell you another experience that is epiphanal and often in a positive direction, even for sociopaths. And this was something, again, I learned in this interview. Having kids.
Oh, I'm sure.
Everybody gets it when I say that, right? Especially if you've had kids, because you know what that does to you. And if you listen to Robert Sapolsky's lectures on human behavioral biology, which are available for free, by the way, on the internet, Stanford University lecture, the whole course, it's like 26 lectures. And he talks specifically about this thing, that there are biological chemical processes that are occurring to flood your brain when you're holding that little baby, that just overwhelm. And you all know what I'm talking about. It's overwhelming love. And it's what even Shawn, as a sociopath, was describing as unconditional love. He said, I didn't have unconditional love for my wife. He was cheating on her up one side and down the other. It was all full of conditions. But his kids, whole different matter. And that alone wasn't enough to change his behavior enough to get him to stop cheating on his wife or be a bastard. It took more, but that was kind of really, I believe, the beginning.
So what does that say about people who have biological children and still can't get there?
What does it say? I think it says that there are either genetic defects or there might be other societal, cultural, educational, or environmental factors stopping that from happening somehow. I think either the person's got defective machinery, if that process is not happening, or something is serving to stop the process from happening, right? Distance, time, like if you're not there, it's the physical connection that is so important in that. You don't do that over a Zoom call,
well,
right?
Well, in that first moment, too, the first moment that they put the baby in mom's arms, you know, like when she sees it for the first, there's all these hormones going on between her and the baby.
Exactly. So that's kind of the thing that goes in that direction. Okay. So I don't think that you can make somebody who is unempathetic suddenly have empathy, but they can realize that they don't have empathy and that suddenly they realize, or at least in the case of Shawn McCraney, whose interview I watched, they realize that that's actually not a feature in their life. That is a bug. That's something they need to do something about. And they can't suddenly just turn on empathy, but they can recognize and talk themselves into being kinder, acting more honestly, acting more virtuously. Because if they understand what virtue and society and kindness are, and they do if they are navigating the world even semi-successfully, then they can fake it. And sometimes maybe they could even make it. It's conjecture right now, okay? I'm not asserting truths here. I'm just saying this is how I'm thinking about this and throwing it out here for you guys. So, you know, if I could change, if prisoners in prison can change by finding Jesus or Buddha or whatever, then that change is possible, and that's the good news. Change for the worse is also possible, and that's the bad news. But if there's a path out, then that's a good thing to know.